Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 627. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on my YouTube channel, then click on my college website link, and you can download the workbook. Excel Magic Trick 627. Oh, wow. This is going to be an epic video, probably the longest, most epic video I have done to date. We're going to talk about the frequency function from beginning to end, the basics of it, what it does, all the aspects of it, and then we're going to look at all the way to the end, 10 examples, getting more and more complicated as we go through this video. So what does the frequency function do? It counts, given some bins or upper limits, elements. So all we're going to do is create a frequency distribution. Let's go look at an example here. There's our upper limits. Here are the categories, and the frequency function, we'll talk about this. Very important. If you give it an upper limit of 10,000 as your first bin, when it goes over to this column here and counts the amounts that are less than or equal to 10,000, that's the first bin, and it's different than the rest. Here we get a count of 0. If you give it the second bin of 20,000, that means there's an increment of 10,000 between these. This line right here, the frequency function in that cell right there, will count between this one greater than this one, so an amount greater than the bin from before, but less than or equal to the current upper limit bin. So it does that all the way down, and when it gets to the end, it's going to have one extra category. We give it this many bins. It has one extra category. It says for the last category, any amount above that last bin. Now, the reason why it does that is so it can be robust. If we didn't have this last category and someone accidentally had a value here or didn't include a upper bin that was high enough, then we'd get a miscount. So it's very robust because the first category, everything below. The last category, there's always one extra, and it's everything above. Now let's see how to do this. Now when we have a data set, here's some invoice numbers and amounts here. There's lots of ways to figure out the bins, and in my statistics class I talk about some methods. But at minimum, at least get the minimum and the max from your data set. So all I did was say, hey, what's the min in that data set and what's the max? And then build your categories, your bins, your upper levels so that all values are included. So I'm going to start at 10,000. I'm going to hit Enter and then put 20,000. These two numbers have established a pattern, and then I drag it down. So I get 10,000. Right? So this is exactly what the categories will look like. Very important. Now I have some formulas here that are calculating these if you want to download this and look at it. Sometimes for people that don't understand what's going on, these categories are necessary. Oftentimes they're not. You just say, hey, these are the upper limits. These two aspects right here usually are not understood by someone looking at it that doesn't understand it. So sometimes categories can be nice. Now, frequency function. Let's look at some notes over here before we use it. We need bin arrays. Those are the upper values. Data array, that's the argument. That's the name of it. Those are just the values to count. Frequency function ignores empty cells and text. Now, we'll use that to our advantage when we get to a later example when we're counting unique numbers. Frequency function always returns one more category than you give it. That's to include that upper value like we talked about. It always delivers a vertical array. So if you want to display your frequency distribution horizontally, we're going to have to see a way to get around that. This is an array function, so there's two things that must be true. You must highlight all the cells in advance when you're delivering an array of numbers for your frequency, and you have to use Control-Shift-Enter. Not only that, but if there are duplicate bins, which in normal uses you don't have duplicate bins, but if you do, in our count unique example, we're going to take advantage of this. If there's duplicates, the duplicates will get a count of 0. And we'll see an example of that. All right, here we go. We have our bins. We highlight the cells, one more than the number of bins. We type. Notice we've highlighted in advance all the cells. So each cell will get a different number, a different count depending on the associated category. So this one will get whatever the category defined by this upper limit is in that cell. Active cell at the top, so you type equals frequency. First, it wants the data. I go over and get this. Control Shift down. Now I'm going to hit F4, F4, F4. Notice if we had some dollar signs, or if we don't, relative cell reference, totally irrelevant when you're entering the frequency function into a bunch of cells. And we'll see that when we enter this, P2 to P32 will be entered into all of these cells. So it's not like a normal formula with normal cell references like absolute or relative. Bins, Control Shift down arrow, close parentheses, and now I use Control Shift and Enter to enter all of the formulas. Notice here, P2 to P32. Notice here, P2 to P32. This is an array. You see the curly brackets there. That means we've entered it with Control Shift Enter. It does require that. If you try to delete something in the middle of it, it says cannot change part of the array. You have to change the array all at once because it was entered in all together. So that's the basics of how to use the frequency function. Now, in some cases, like I teach statistics, we do not want categories like this. And so we want categories like greater than or equal to 30,000, but less than the upper limit. If that's the case, which is sometimes the case, depending on your chart criteria or frequency distribution criteria, you cannot use the frequency function because the frequency will always include the upper limit. You have to switch to like COUNTIFs function or sum product or something like that, and I have other videos on that. Now notice, next aspect of the frequency function, notice we entered it into a vertical array of cells. Let's just see what happens if we were to, I'm going to scoop this out of here. Scoop this out of here, copy, and then escape. What if we wanted it horizontal, not vertical? I'm going to come over here. I have the same kind of setup here. Actually, I'm just going to redo it here. One more cell than the bins equals frequency. I want the data. So I'm going to click there, Control Shift down arrow, F4, 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 comma, and then I need my bins here. F4, F4, F4. All right, so if I highlight this and hit the F9 key, please notice that's called array syntax, curly brackets, semicolons mean row. That means row, row, row. That's a vertical array. If there were commas, it would be a horizontal array, and it would represent columns. So I'm going to Control Z. What happens if we Control Shift Enter? We get 0. And all that's happening is because we've listed it this way, it can only list the very first item from the vertical array. So what do we need to do? Because there were, I'm going to hit F2. Because these are semicolons, we need to convert them to commas. No problem. We don't need to really know that semicolons are rows and commas are columns, Control Z, because we can just use the transpose function. Now, the transpose function is exactly like the frequency in that it is an array function, and it must be entered with Control Shift Enter. All transpose does is take all the rows and turn them to columns, and vice versa. Control Shift Enter, and now we have our frequency distribution orientated horizontally. Transpose of the frequency, because frequency only delivers a vertical array. We're going to run into this problem in our last example also. All right. Next topic. Before we start going, most of the rest of the topics are all sorts of examples of count unique and how the frequency function is really the best method for counting unique. Now I want to look at an example of something first. So I'm going to highlight O and R, right-click Insert, Smart Tag Clear Formatting. And I'm going to make it really small here. Oops, wrong one. Control Z. I'm going to make Q really small. I always leave a little blank columns because if I ever sort or do anything, the data set can't touch anything else, or else it messes up the sort. Now, we talked about the fact that frequency function delivers a vertical array. But next, we want to talk about counting unique items, whether they are numbers or words or other items. Let's go ahead and just look at what happens if we highlight a range that is exactly the same size as all the data items. In the active cell at the top, I'm going to type frequency. Data array, well, I'm going to highlight this, Control Shift down on F4, comma, now bins. In our last couple examples, we highlighted this, but what would happen if we actually highlight the same range there again? Well, think about this. What is it going to do? There's a duplicate right there, and there's a duplicate right there, and there's actually another exact duplicate down below. Now remember, over in our notes, we mentioned that if there are duplicate bins, which we are given that right now, the second one will not get a count. It will count 0. The first bin is the only one that counts. So if there are 3 entries in this list of this, which means there's 1 unique item and 2 duplicates, this bin right here, represented in this somewhere in here, will get a count of 3 for all of them, but this one will get a 0, and the one below will get a 0. Let's just prove this to ourselves by entering this in, Control Shift Enter. 1, that means it's unique. This number right here has 2 other duplicates, 1 for the unique and 2 for the duplicates. And look down here, we get a 0. And finally, let's find the third one too, if I can find it. There it is. We get a 0. So how could we use this knowledge here? We get a return list of numbers, and the zeros are the ones that are duplicates. All the time there's a number greater than 0, that means we need to count that. So we need to go 1, 2, 3, 4, not count that one, 5. No problem. We can just use this same little thing right here. I'm actually going to copy this, Control C, and come over here. And we're going to make a formula to count unique numbers. This is actually count unique numbers. Equals Control V. Now, right now, if we highlight this and hit the F9, we can see we get that exact list of numbers, but in a single cell. If we entered it right now, it would just display the very first one, Control Z. But what if we said a greater than 0? Now we highlight this and hit F9. Now we got a bunch of trues and falses. So true, true, true means this is unique. False means that's a duplicate. Control Z. How do we convert those trues and falses to ones and zeros? We put parentheses around it, and we put a double negative. Why the parentheses? Because this is a unitary operator, the negation symbol, and it is calculated before the greater than symbol, which is a comparative operator. So to force the comparative operator to calculate before the double negative, we put it in parentheses. Now, the double negative will turn the trues and falses to ones and zeros, F9. Now we simply Control Z and put our sum product. That will count those ones and zeros. So we get a count of 17. So that's how to count unique numbers. Now, one interesting aspect of counting unique numbers, because the frequency function ignores blank cells, we can actually count. If we had any blanks here, it would count correctly. There's still, and let's remove, I'm sorry, Control Z. I'm going to remove a unique one right there. Now we should get a count of 16. Sure enough, we do. So Control Z. If you're counting unique numbers, it's much easier to do using the frequency function than if you're counting unique words or text entries. Now let's look at another example related to count unique numbers. What if we want to count unique numbers with criteria from a second column? So here's an example. I'm going to make this smaller so we can see this whole data set here. You saw that label there. We want to count unique numbers, but only the ones from Oakland. So that means we want to count unique numbers, but we have to isolate not all the numbers in this column, just the ones that are associated with Oakland. Now here it is. We have location, some site where we took a measurement for statistics, and then some measurement. We're not interested in all of the Oakland ones, just the unique ones. See, Oakland gets a 5 twice. So in essence, we're going to use the same sort of formula, because ultimately we're counting these numbers. But we need to add one extra if in there that says if anything in this column is Oakland, 1, 2, 3, then go and look at the numbers in this column. So you ready? We use the same construct, equals sum product, double negative, open parentheses, frequency. And now instead of just highlighting bloop here, we have to do an if, because data array needs just the numbers from Oakland. So we say if anything in this column right here is equal to Oakland, then what do we want? This. That will give us our numbers from this column here. We do not need to put a value of false. If we highlight this if, that's doing a delivery to the data array, F9, we can see we got a 5, a 1, a 5. Now, those are the data items to count. There's two 5s, so we Control Z. We do comma, and the bins are going to be the exact same numbers. Remember, even if it runs into a 3, it's going to, as a bin, the count will be 0 for that. So I'm going to close parentheses on the frequency. And now let's just see what we get. F9. We get 2 for a 5 and 1 for this item right here. And then, yeah, because we got two 5s and a single 1. I'm going to Control Z. Don't want to leave that hard code in there. We have to say greater than 0. That'll give us our trues. We close parentheses on that. You see the green one right there. Close parentheses on that, and then Control Enter. Now, why? Well, let me do that again. Enter. Why did we get a value error? Value error means your array formula was not entered with Control Shift Enter. But I thought some product would allow arrays. Yes, that's true, but there's something overriding that aspect of the sum product function. The if function right here, logical test, in the hierarchy of how this calculates, since this logical test, it is usually expecting a single true or false. We gave it an array. Forget it. No matter if this is, wherever this is, whether it's in a sum product or by itself in some other function, you have to use Control Shift Enter. So watch this, Control Shift Enter. So the question becomes, if we're making this as robust as possible, do we really want to leave some product here? Because most people look at it and go, oh, that can do an array. So I'm not going to leave some product there. I'm going to take it out. And I'm going to use the sum function. That way, if someone that sees it, that knows how to do array, they Control Shift Enter, it'll calculate, and you don't get confused. You don't say, oh, why isn't some product calculating? It's because of that if there. All right, well, we get a correct count if we change this to Seattle. We get a correct count also, even though there's another Seattle there. There's only one unique item. Tacoma, we get a 2. All right, so numbers. We did a unique count on straight numbers, and now we did a unique count of numbers with criteria for a second column. We want to go on and look at a formula for counting unique anything, not just a number. Now, here's a well-known formula for counting unique anything. And we're going to start by counting those numbers back over there, equals sum product. And our array is going to be 1 divided by, and then we're going to use the COUNTIF function. And we're going to compare and contrast the COUNTIF function to the frequency and to the match, which we're going to use later on in these two arguments. Because we're going to kind of use similar trick. We're going to put all the data items here. And then before we did data array and bins, here we have range and criteria. And then we're going to put all of the items for the criteria. So I'm going to go over and get these numbers. Control Shift down arrow, F4, F4. I'm going to copy this. Now, there's a couple important things about these arguments. I'm going to comma, Control V, close parentheses. Now, the range in COUNTIF can never be an array. Criteria. It is expecting a single criteria like a number or word or something. We're giving it a bunch. This argument can handle an array. Now, well, that's going to cause a problem later on, so our knowledge that this can never handle an array is helpful. But let's see what this COUNTIF does compared to the frequency. Remember, we have all the items and all the items. So if I highlight this and hit the F9 key, you can see, unlike the frequency that went 1 and 3, remember that invoice was listed 3 times. When it was subsequently seen at a duplicate bin, there was a 0 and then another 0. So then we could just say something like greater than 0. But here, look what it does. The first time it sees the invoice, it says how many of them are there? 3. The next time it sees it, it says how many are there? 3. So really we're going to have 3, 3, 3 for that one invoice. But what we do is we say 1 divided by 3 plus 1 divided by 3 plus 1 divided by 3. Well, what's 1/3 3 times? It's 1. So this is a great way to get a unique count. Control Z. And you can see if I highlight that whole thing and hit the F9, it's hard to see up here. But we get, instead of the 3's, we get 0.33333, which is 1/3. Now I'm going to Control Z. How come there's so many 3's there? Because there's multiple items over there listed 3 times. Now I'm going to close parentheses and enter. Notice it gives us the right count. Now there's a potential problem with this method. If there are never any duplicates or wildcard characters like asterisks, then this formula could work. But it's not robust because there's lots of things that, or there's a few things that could give it a cause of trouble. If I come over here and hit delete, we can see our frequency formula work just fine. But now what's happening here? We get a divide by 0 error. And the reason why is simple. If we highlight this COUNTIF and hit the F9, just to there and hit the F9, you can see there's a 0 there. So 1 divided by 0 is divided by 0, and you're not allowed to do that. I'm going to Control Z, Control Z. That was just getting rid of that undo. All right, so that function has limited use if you have blanks or wildcards. Let's go ahead and see an alternative, very similar to this, but we'll just add one other array that will eliminate the blanks. I'm going to say equals sum product. And I'm going to use double negative, open parentheses, and I'm going to choose a different range here. This range right here. And I'm going to say not, less than, greater than, double quote, so that means not blank. Right, that'll give us a bunch of 1's and 0's, comma, and then we'll use our 1 divided by count. Oh, actually, we don't need to do. Well, let me put the 1 divided by COUNTIF and show you something interesting here. And we're going to list that range, Control V, comma, Control V. Now, we still will get a divide by 0. And I'll show you if we go like this. F9, we get a divide by 0, which will mess everything up. So watch this, Control Z. We can, this argument inside a COUNTIF can handle arrays, but this one cannot. So no problem. We can come to the end here and go ampersand double quote. That says, please add a blank bit of text to whatever the elements are here. And let's just take a look here. If I hit F9, you'll be able to see that the number 12 and 0 are numbers. They're not in double quotes. Double quotes means it's text, Control Z. But if you highlight this whole thing here and hit F9, you'll see that, oh, the 12 and the 0 is not there anymore. It's just double quote. So it's actually text. And that's a clever way of getting rid of that 0. 1 divided by this 1 divided by this text will not give us a divide by 0. So I'm going to Control Z. Now let's close parentheses, and I'm going to hit Enter. Now notice we didn't get a value error. This criteria argument in the COUNTIF, if we put an array there, it doesn't mess up the sum product. But the if right here, forget it. That logical test is programmed in such a way that the sum product can't handle it. So we went ahead and put sum there. Now look at this. We can actually make this a little bit more condensed because we have 2 arrays, right? These are 1's and 0's, and then this is the second array where we divide by 1. But check this out. Anytime you do an operation, if we get rid of that right there, we're left with trues and falses. Now, unless we do an operation like multiplying or double negative or adding 0 or dividing by 1 or something like that, or times 1, these are going to say true and false, and some product can't understand it. But Control Z, if we leave that there, we can just have true and falses in the numerator. And now get rid of that, and we have one array. So we have trues and falses. Because they're going to be divided by these items here, these items that we counted, it will convert the trues and falses to ones and zeros. Let's just enter, and we can see we get a count of 4. Let's go ahead and Alt-Tough this. Formula ribbon, formula auditing, evaluate formula, which is off the screen right there. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Alt-T-U-F, Alt-Tough. And then you can see here, evaluate, evaluate, evaluate. It's going in here. It gets the count. Now it's going to divide this by this. And wherever it's a false divided by number, it's just going to give us a 0. So one more time, and then we can see we get our 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. It adds them together. It gets 2 or 4. Sorry, 4, because there's 4 unique items. And there are 4 unique items. Now let's go ahead and look at what happens if you like to put asterisks. And your intention is you want this to be counted as different than this. When I hit enter, it gives me 4.5. Yeah, that's just not going to work. Now let's look at a potential solution for this. There is a character, the tilde character, tilde is to the left of the number 1, that can deactivate wildcards. Let's come up here, and if we were allowed to do this, we could come to the range argument, and simply for the items we're looking at, we could put a tilde in double quotes, so double quote, tilde, double quote, end double quote, ampersand. Now, that would do it if we could do it. If we try to hit enter here, it gives us this message. This message says a bunch of stuff, but what it should say is the range argument in COUNTIF never can handle an array, so please don't try to put one there. I'm going to click escape. I'm going to click escape. Well, before I hit escape, since we realize that that's not possible, there's another way of counting unique. There is, we'll switch to the match function, which will give us an ordinal position, and we'll use it inside our frequency. The match function will be able to handle this little tilde here. We're going to have the same construct inside of match. We're going to have, in essence, our lookup values with the tilde, and then our lookup range will have this ampersand to deal with the divide by 0. So let's see how to do this. I'm going to get rid of this right here. Now, our goal here is, in this formula, count unique anything if they're blanks and or wildcards. Now, this formula here is going to be the basis for the rest of our tricks here. And it's going to involve a bunch of little tricks. One of the things is we're going to use the if function again. And inside the if, we're going to have an array. So we're not going to use sum product to add. We're going to, just like we did over here, right? We didn't use sum products as we knew we had to do Control-Shift-Enter to get those to enter the formula because of the if. So we're going to do the same thing here. That's the beginning part of this. I'm going to scroll over here. And I'm going to switch data sets. And I'm actually going to scrunch this up so I can see everything. Here's our data, including an asterisk. Now I'm going to start off with sum, and then an if. Now, our goal with this formula is to put some get trues and falses in this argument from here. A true will mean unique, 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 not unique, not unique. And that's not unique either. That's not unique. Right? If we could do that, then we type a comma, and the value if true would be 1. That way, the trues and falses will give us a bunch of 1s, and then the sum function would add it. Now, we don't need that value of false, because if we just leave it out like this, sum will ignore. Falses would be put in, and the sum function could ignore that. So I'm going to get rid of that. The whole heart of this formula comes down to how in the world do we get our logical test, a string of trues and falses, to tell us unique item. One other thing important about this argument here, this argument can have a true, false, or a string of trues and falses, but it can also interpret any non-zero number as true. So that means -10, 10, 3, 1 are all true. 0 is the only number that's false. All right, and we're going to deliver some numbers, zeros and numbers, just like we saw earlier when we were counting unique numbers. Remember, the frequency delivered a number anytime there was a unique entry and a 0 anytime it wasn't. All right, so we're going to have to do some tricky things here because these aren't just numbers. But we have to start with frequency, so I'm going to start with frequencies. Data array. We first have to eliminate the blank, so I'm going to say equals if anything here. is not double quote, so less than, greater than, double quote. That's not blank. Then what do we want? Now, we can't use the count if here, so we're going to switch to match. Match will give us the ordinal position. MAT tab. The ordinal position. So we're going to get 1, 2, 3. We don't want anything there. 4, nothing. 5. So those are the ordinal positions we want. So we're going to do similar to with a COUNTIF, lookup value and lookup array. But here, the lookup value, we can go double quote, tilde, double quote, ampersand, this range right here. Control V because I have it copied. That's the lookup value, comma, lookup array, Control V, and we don't want that divide by 0, so we're going to ampersand double quote. Now, very important, when we get to the match type here, we want to put a 0 for exact match. And the reason why is when we put a 0 for exact match, it will only find the first item. So for example, match will give an ordinal position of 1 for Sue. But the next time it finds Sue, because it's returning, the match will return an array of numbers, it's going to also return a number 1. So that's what the 0 does. Duplicates always only look at the first one. Close parentheses. And let's just see that that's true. I'm going to highlight this match and F9. Should know if we get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, right? Because there's a duplicate right there. But did it see the Joe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It did. It saw it as a unique item. But also notice that blank right there. But no problem. This will eliminate that number. Control Z for the blank. So if not blank, then that. That is our value if true. We close parentheses. We do not need the false. And we can go ahead and highlight this. This will be our data array, F9. Notice we get a 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 7. So there's 2 1s. This is in the frequency, so that's data to count. The bins, when we give it 1, the first bin, the number 1, the upper limit will get a 1, 2 because there are 2 of them. This array right here is just the data. Control Z. Control Z. Comma. Now, what in the world do we do bins for bins? Well, notice that we did match, which gives us an ordinal position. So we really need as the bins 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. I'm going to do our old standby, the row of that. Oops. The row of that. Now, what'll that'll give us 5 to 12. We don't want that, so we minus row of that first cell right there, that first cell right there. So 5 minus 5 is 0, so we don't want that, so we add 1 back in. Close parentheses. This row will give us F9, our bins. I'm going to Control Z. This will give our items to count, which we already saw had 2 1s. So that frequency, we can close this off. Well, we closed it off right there. So now if we highlight this frequency right there, F9. Remember, it turns a vertical array. Sue, there's 2 of them. 12, 1. Sue, 1. Ah, there's a blank. Nothing. That was from the if blank. The 1, that one's there. Oh, there's a 0 right there. Because remember, frequency ignores when we have a bin duplicate. And then the 1 for there. I'm going to Control Z. Just take a visual look here. This logical test, remember, any non-zero number is true. So this is going to be true, 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 false, true, etc. Control Z. And now the rest of it's easy. We already looked at it. Because logical test, comma, what do we want if true? 1. Now we don't need the false, so I'm going to put close parentheses. I need a close parentheses on the sum, so close parentheses and Control Shift Enter. 5. Totally amazing. All those little tricks in one formula. Now, that is the most robust unique count formula that I have seen around. But now, we don't want to just count a single column. We want to look at some variations on this. We want to do a couple things. One is we want to actually count unique names here, but only but based on criteria in a second column. So imagine this. We have the criteria no, and we want a unique list of names. Well, this is a voting situation. The column of names, you can vote as many times as you want. The vote over here. So we just want to see how many unique people voted for no. You can see here I have conditional formatting. No is listed 1, 2, 3 times, but there's a duplicate on Sue, so we should get a 2 here. When we change it to yes, we should get 4. All right, so we already did the heart of this formula. The only difference between what we just did and here is we're going to have to isolate this column. Instead of the whole column, we want just the ones that are in yellow. All this means we're going to use the same formula over here, because this is the most robust type of count unique formula that I've seen. We just need one more criteria. So let's do this. I don't want to retype this out. I'm going to do a big cheat here. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste. Now watch this. This is going to be so weird. When I put it into edit mode, let me just take a look. Now, it copied over. It looked like it got it exactly right. Remember, over here, this formula, we just had a single column. So all the ranges in it were looking here. Same thing here. Everything's looking there. I set it up so that when we copied it over, it would do that. And everything's perfect, except for what? One thing. We're getting a count of 6. And in fact, there are unique names. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a unique name, and there's a unique name. So there's 6. But remember, if we have criteria in this column, that means we need to use the yeses to isolate. Not everything in this column, just the yellows. No problem. We just come right here. The first if was please no blanks. We just need another if right here. If is Control Z. Let me scoot this over here. We just need another if. So I have to very, very carefully find there. That's the value of true. I need another if. If anything in this column is equal to this, then the match. So really now we're saying not blank in this column. Also, there has to be a true from this column when it says yes, and then do that same match. The match is exactly the same. But don't forget, we've added an extra if, so we have to come right here and put one more parentheses for that if right there. Control Shift Enter. Now let's try it. Let's do a no. And there we go. Let's put a blank. Now we have 2 right there. Even though there was a no here, for whatever reason, there was a blank there, and that works. Control Z. Pretty cool. Now, we're going to take this one step further. Here we're counting unique items in this column with our most unique, robust formula based on a criteria here. We want to do the exact same thing here, but instead of just counting, we want to extract them. All right, this is probably the most wild formula we're ever going to do here. But let's think about this. We can kind of simplify it a little bit. We've done the heavy lifting here. We have inside of this if, this frequency, remember, right to there. I think I got it right. If I hit F9, remember that was our true-false trigger to tell us what items to count. I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to copy this. I'm actually going to use the same thing over here inside of a extract records formula. All right. Make this really small here. Equals if. Now, when we copy this down right now, we only need to extract Sue's name and Lung's. So we need a trigger. When we get past 2, we need to turn it off. So we just go, hey, rows. We're sitting in AK2. So I'm going to put AK $2 colon AK2. That's our number incrementer. As we go down, this will count 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to say when that is greater than this. And now I'm going to hit my F4 key to lock it. If that's the case, comma, what do I want? I want to show a blank. Right down here, I want to show a blank. Otherwise, what am I going to need? I need a lookup function, and I'm extracting multiple items, so I'm going to use index. The array of items to extract are here. I'm going to hit the F4 key to lock it, comma. And now, I've done many other videos on this. We need multiple row numbers. Now we need 2 in this cell, but when we copy it down, then we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We need 6. So we're going to use our small, which can successively extract our row numbers. The array, we're going to use our same construction we've seen in other videos. If some criteria is true, then please give me the row number here. So we're going to say if, and our logical test, I'm going to control V. That whole thing over there, the same exact thing we just did. Now, the only problem with what we did over there is we didn't lock anything, so I'm going to have to go here and do it manually. I'm hitting the F4 key. Everything needs to be locked. All right, so that's our logical test. If that's true, which means that this frequency is going to deliver all that, what do we want? We want a row number. Well, we already have the row number thing figured out here, right there. So I'm going to copy and paste. Now I'm going to close parentheses because we do not need that false. I'm going to, that's the array. Is that amazing? Look at this whole thing right here. If I hit this and hit the F9 key, we get a 2, a bunch of falses, a 6. And that's exactly what we wanted. So that whole thing is sitting inside a small. And then we need our number incrementer as we go down, go and take out the first smallest and the second smallest. So Control Z. Then I go to rows. Copy. K, I'm going to put a comma. Control V. Close parentheses on the small. That's our row number. So we close parentheses on that. We already had, that is our false, so we close parentheses on that. Control Shift Enter, and then copy it down. All right, now let's test it. Let's do yes. Let's also put a yes right here and go brrr, and then we get an SFD also there. Now I'm going to Control Z. Right? So we've done something very wild here. Look at that. Luckily, we did it in successive pieces and pasted it all together. So that is extracting unique records from one column with criteria based on another. The final frequency example we're going to look at here is what to do if you want to extract items but place them horizontal. In addition, the other complication is we have lots of items. Over here, there was just one list. Over here, we have lots of lists. So as we copy down, we want to extract new unique lists. So we're not going to be able to use absolute cell references because if our formula here is looking at this range, it needs to be only locked going this way. But when it moves down to the next row, it needs to be looking at the next range of values. The second point is also we have items listed, and we are going to use the frequency function to tell us which ones are unique. But the problem with frequency is it delivers a vertical array. So if we have the frequency function inside the if delivering a vertical array, and we want to deliver column numbers, which is what we're going to need because we're going to copy these across the columns, we're going to have to use the transpose function in either the column part or the frequency part to orientate both arrays as columns. All right, I'm going to do the whole one here from scratch. This is going to be wild indeed. Now, I've already done the count unique. I just counted each one of these. So each row has a new unique count. And since they're just numbers, you just get to use that part. Right, so ready? Equals if. And then we can't use, remember, this is extracting records. We're ultimately going to use the index function to extract records. But we do need to, as it copies this way, show blanks when it gets past 3. So we're, instead of the row, we're going to have to use columns. I'm in AO, so I do $, because we're copying across the column AO, colon AO. Oh, I didn't do that right. O, no, AO. That's why it's hard to type in O. I typed in a 0. Colon AO. Whenever that is greater than O. Columns, did I put, I need an O there. That shouldn't look like that, and I can't see the arrow. When you do a video this long, sometimes it's... Let's see if I can do it this way. I'm going to click there, and then come down one. Oh, AO2. See, I couldn't see that. And then I'm going to control period, or shift colon. And then I'm going to lock just this one, F4, just in front of the column. All right. Whenever that is greater than this also needs to be locked on the column, because when you go this way, it needs to be looking at 3. But when it moves down, it needs to move to that one. Whenever that's true, then we want a blank. Otherwise, we're going to use index. Index needs the array of items to extract. It's this. And you better F4 3 times to get it locked on the column, but not when it goes down. Comma, the row number. Now, we need column numbers here, but if there are only columns in our array right there, we don't need to put a comma and get to the columns number argument. We can just put it in the row arguments. Now we're going to have to use small, and we're going to have to use if, and we're going to have to use a frequency function here. Data array, we need to eliminate the blanks and then use match to get the ordinal position. So I'm going to say if this thing right here, and I'm going to lock it across the columns, is not blank, then I want match. I'm going to use this range right here locked with the columns a lot, so I copied it. We're going to make this as robust as possible, so we're going to put double quote tilde, double quote ampersand. That's to eliminate if there were any asterisks. Control V, comma, and then Control V on the lookup array, ampersand double quote in case there's any blanks. Comma, don't forget the match. That match of 0 for exact match says if there are duplicates, it will not go on to the second one. Close parentheses on the match. That is all we need for the value if true. We don't need the value if false, so close parentheses. That gives us our data array. Our bins, we're going to have to use not rows. We have columns. So we're going to use the column function, Control V on that range, minus column of that one right there. Control V and then backspace. Let's see, I'll get this out of the way. Notice all those columns are locked, because when we're going this way, it needs to be locked, but not when it goes down. Close parentheses, plus 1. Those are the bin arrays. Close parentheses. Now, let's go ahead and highlight this frequency and hit the F9. And sure enough, we get unique, unique, 0 for not unique, 0 for blank, unique, and 0 for blank. So I'm going to Control Z. Now, that's the logical test. Now, remember, we're ultimately dumping column numbers into small, right? So for the small array, so we have to type comma. And the value of true from that frequency is this thing right here. Control C. That's the value of true. And when we close parentheses on that, we see that the small now has its huge construction here. If we hit F9, we can see that that is not what we want. 1, 2, 3. Now check this out. This is where we're going to learn about vertical and horizontal arrays. You could see comma 1 to 6 and then a semicolon, 1 to 6 and then a semicolon. What it did is it jumped all the column numbers every time it saw a number or a true. Control Z. Let's just look at the two pieces together. If all of this, that is a vertical array with semicolons, Control Z. This part is a F9. Whoops, escape. Right, just to there, F9. That part is columns. It is a horizontal array. So we need to adjust one of them, either this one or this one. I'm going to adjust this one, Control Z. I'm going to put transpose. It'll take from columns and move it back to move it to rows, close parentheses. So now when I transpose on this and hit the F9, we got our semicolons, which means a vertical array or rows. Now when it says if vertical trues and falses, it'll just take this vertical and it will work just fine. Let's go ahead and test it all the way to there and F9. Sure enough, you can see now 1 semicolon instead of 1 to 6. Control Z. Wow. Now we need our incrementer as we go across the columns. So I'm going to copy that. Control V. Close parentheses on the small. Let's just do that again. Just got to close parentheses on that. You know, you get lost in these big functions if you don't have these screen tips popping up. You're like, what? We just put the row number in. We already did our false, so we close parentheses on that. We Control Shift Enter, and if I get this right this time, I'll be stunned. Copy it over and copy it down. Totally amazing. So if I type a 1 here, sure enough, that works. If I put an asterisk, then sure enough, that works also. All right. If you watched this to the end, I'm amazed. That was everything I know about the frequency function. And the reason why I did this video is just because there are so many amazing uses. And if we kind of go from the beginning to the end and learn all the pieces as we go through, which in essence I had to do before I could figure out how all this works. But look at that. All right, see you next trick.